This week on the BackTable podcast.
If you were to try today to take a bunch of patient labs, upload it into the latest ChatGPT, and ask stuff like, can I get a trend line on this value? Or can I get, can you give me a patient summary for this lab? It will do a really good job, but it's a really big but. ChatGPT is not HIPAA compliant, and ChatGPT, and they're very open about it, they use your data for training. So you obviously don't want to put HPI into ChatGPT. And so that's why internally we built a fully HIPAA compliant ChatGPT where you can upload documents and analyze them. And all the data that you put is in a HIPAA compliant environment. It's never shared with anyone. It's fully encrypted and it's not used for training. And it's fully HIPAA compliant.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the BackTable ENT podcast, where we discuss all things ENT. We bring you the best and brightest in our field with the hope that you can take something from our show to your practice.
This is Aditya Bagrodia as your host this week, and I'm very excited to introduce our guest today, Elie Toubiana, founder and CEO of ScribeMD AI. Elie, welcome to the show. How are you doing today?
Hey, good. Thank you for having me.
Well, it's a pleasure. I had the good fortune of attending the USC AI conference, which was pretty amazing and mind-blowing, and ran across Elie, kind of simultaneously was thinking about incorporating AI and particularly Scribe AI into my conversation. We had an amazing initial chat, and I was like, you got to come on the show. So glad to be doing it. And Elie, why don't you start out with, sharing a little bit about how you got into this line of work, let's just call it.
Yeah. So super quick background myself. So I'm not a physician. I'm an engineer and I've worn many hats. Fun fact, actually, I was part of the engineering team that launched Uber Eats back in 2015. So that was quite an experience. And since then, we've launched a couple of companies. And the last one that we launched in 2022 is a company called ScribeMD.ai. And really, the idea was, in my family, essentially everyone is a physician, from my wife to my dad. And I really noticed that a lot of things that doctors do have nothing to do with doctoring, I guess. And also, I was really kind of startled by the fact that physicians are retiring at a super early age these days. A lot of it has to do with burnout. And I was trying to figure out how can we be helpful. And especially with AI picking up and with my skill set of engineering, I was like, okay, there are clearly solutions that can be built to help physicians. And one thing, by the way, that I noticed that was super interesting is it really felt to me at the beginning that physician burnout had to do with physician working too much. And it's definitely a big part of it. But one thing that I found super interesting is actually burnout doesn't come from working too much. It comes from working too much of the things that you don't want to do. And so my goal was physicians, most of them actually love spending time with their patients and they hate having to do admin work. So why don't we get the AI to do all the admin work? So that's kind of the goal.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And, I've heard statistics anywhere from about 70 to 90% of any given patient encounter is actually not with the patient. That's pre-charting, then a small sliver with the patient, and then the aftermath of documenting everything that transpired. So it's one of those things that sounds incredibly obvious, and you kind of hit on this, right? Workplace shortages, workforce shortages, burnout. These are real things. And I personally, and nearly certainly on the behalf of physicians, what we enjoy is spending time with patients, not necessarily writing down in some kind of random format everything that transpired.
I was going to say the crazy thing is both you and I are of the generation where we saw the change of our parents' generation. My dad is a physician. I saw him being an old school physician doing family doctor in our neighborhood, knew everyone in the neighborhood and did everything himself, from picking up the phone to booking patients to calling pharmacies for prescription. And it's obviously not sustainable, especially if you have a shortage of physicians, right? And so the thing that I get the most that kind of pisses me off a little bit is when I tell people I work in AI and healthcare, they're physicians get really worried because they're wait, are you going to replace us? Does it mean there's going to be no human interaction or human touch anymore? And my point is that's the opposite. If anything, I feel when you walk into a room today with a physician, your doctor is like super busy. He's going to be typing away exactly what you're saying, and he's not going to look at you. He's going to look at a computer screen. And one of the really cool things with ScribeMD is obviously we saw like an uptick in like satisfaction for physicians. They're super happy. They love it. They save a ton of time. The really cool thing is patients like it too, because they're like, hey, the doctor was looking at me when I was talking to him. So that was pretty cool.
Well, I couldn't agree more. And, my typical clinic day, this is not hyperbole, is I usually get into the office at 4:30. I review the charts and do as much pre-charting as I can until 8 a.m. And then I do not sit at a computer from 8 a.m. until 5 p.m. because I already know the histories and I don't have to review everything. I'm not charting anything additional on top of whatever I've garnered on the pre-visit. The subsequent 2 hours, I wrap everything up. So I enjoy the patient experience interaction without a device intervening, but it does come at a cost. I'm tired at the end of the day, and that's time with my family or exercising or God knows what I might like to be doing. So I appreciate that. Well, let's take it from the ground floor. I don't want to keep it as a foregone conclusion that all the listenerships are going to be familiar what a AI scribe is. Can you just describe that at a high level?
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty straightforward. So in case of ScribeMD, we have different ways you can use it, but essentially you walk into a patient's room, you start the encounter with a patient, you press a button to record the conversation. Obviously, you have to ask consent to the patient, but you press a button to record the conversation. When you're done, you press a button again, and within around like 15 seconds, you get a fully generated SOAP note. That's as simple as that.
Okay, that immediately sounds appealing, and maybe perhaps with ScribeMD, let's talk a little bit about logistics here. Is that an app? Is there any education? Does the app read my last 25 notes and say this is Bagrodia's style, or is it going to be, a little bit impersonal, let's just say? Can you walk through just a bit of those details?
Yeah, so, okay, the way you can interact with the app right now, there are kind of like three main ways. So we have a computer application, so it's a web app. We integrate with a handful of EMR, and essentially you can use ScribeMD, and it's like, think of it as like a web page that you can go on and press record. And essentially any computer that has a microphone will be able to pick up the conversation and summarize it, right? So that's the computer. We also have an iPhone and Android application. So if you go onto the App Store, you search ScribeMD, you'll find us. It's really good, especially if you're like on the go, or if you don't physically have a computer in the room where you're talking to a patient. That's really good. And the third one, I don't have it on me, but we have like an AI pin, and it's essentially like a microphone that you can clip onto your collar, and you essentially walk into the room, press a button. When you're done talking to the patient, you press a button again, and that's it. Like that's going to be sent to our servers, automatically generate the note for you. And one thing you mentioned that's actually really interesting is something that we've been working on really hard is how do we make sure that the note has your voice in it? Because everyone knows like physicians write note differently based on their specialty. So we have specialty-based notes. So urologists, gynecologists, you know how gynecologists love starting their notes with like P3, G2, A1, or whatever it is, right? Like how many pregnancies. And so like we can include that into the note. So we have like a gynecology specific note. But one thing that we've been working on too is learning the AI model to learn your voice. And so one thing that we do now, you can give us like 20 or 30 of your last notes and we can pick up what's your voice. Like, do you like it concise? Do you like it very verbose? Do you always like starting with something? Or do you like including like a patient, like layman term of the like summary of the conversation? So we can do that automatically kind of for you.
So let's do a little game/experiment here. Now, what if you had let's just say a urologic complaint or concern asking for a friend, and I'm your urologist. Let's maybe just role play that and then walk through how that could practically look and see if it brings up any conversation points. Like, you're my patient. I've got a phone with me. I've got ScribeMD AI downloaded. I've hit start. Hey, Elie, Aditya Bagrodia. Nice to meet you.
Oh, nice to meet you. Actually, I do have a super specific question. I'm so glad you mentioned that because I'm taking advantage to talk to a urologist. I have a 5-year-old at home, almost 6 years old, and he wets the bed every night. And I'm trying to figure out, and frankly, he comes in my bed every other night. So if he wets the bed, that means he essentially wets my bed. And so I'm trying to figure out, what would you recommend for him to like to prevent that from happening? And how can I train him to not wet the bed?
Okay, that's perfect. So a couple of questions for you. Does he go to number 2? Does he have poops relatively regularly? Is he constipated? Do there seem to be any sources of stress for him? Did he have any issues or problems as a child, as a baby, for instance? Those are some of the first pass questions. And I'm an adult urologic oncologist, so caveat there.
Yeah, so I don't know. No, I think he's like a totally normal kid. He's like, and I'm trying to get him to pee before going to bed. And he does. And funny enough, I feel like it happens like at the same time every night, like around 2 a.m.
Okay. So I would say, first thing is let's just make sure he's not constipated. Maybe you could do some Miralax for a couple of weeks, really try to clean him out, try to limit fluids for 3 hours before going to bed. Those are some pretty straightforward behavioral things. More importantly, nothing to freak out about. This is so super common. It's like one of the top 3 diagnoses that pediatricians and pediatric urologists see. Does this sound like we got a good plan, Elie?
Love it.
Okay. If we had this conversation, give me your best sense of what a Bagrodia non-verbose soap note might look like.
So really, you can make it your own. So we would need to look at what your notes look like. But let's say you really like concise notes and you don't like long sentences. You just want like bullet points. So you would say probably like patient comes for sans, forgot the technical term for, not incontinence, I guess you said. Did you say incontinence for a kid?
Nocturia would
Nocturia.
Be nighttime urinating, or enuresis is nighttime urinating. Or how about this, Elie? So here's maybe what I would put as a soap. I don't mean to put you on the spot.
No, go for it.
6-year-old boy with no significant past medical history comes in with a chief complaint accompanied by his father of persistent nocturia and enuresis. This takes place fairly consistently every night. No interventions have necessarily been tried on exam. So maybe during the exam, I'm examining the kid. I'll say, his heart sound good, his belly, there's no masses, his genitals are they're typical for a 5-year-old boy. Nothing kind of noteworthy. There's no staining of stool on his undergarments, and that's that. And then you have my plan. Assessment and plan, 6-year-old boy with enuresis, plan, Miralax, limiting fluids, and then reassess in 6 months. Is that like a reasonable expectation of what I could see?
100%. And not only that, so that's great, and you're describing like a standard soap note, but on top of that, you could say, you know what, for every patient I receive, I like just sending them a summary of the conversation. So I think you use the word nocturia, right?
Enuresis, nocturia is more of an adult nighttime urinating. Enuresis is more like the kid version, but yes.
Like when you send a message to your patient, I assume you probably wouldn't use that word specifically. You would be like, oh, I understand that we have like some nighttime urination. And actually, it's a tricky one because depending, maybe you're talking to an adult, maybe you're talking to an adult that doesn't speak really good English. So maybe you want to use like very simple words. And so based on that, we can write a letter for you in your voice that's ready to be copy and pasted to be sent to your patient. So for instance, you can do something like that. Or you can use our AI to say, hey, you know what? Can you help me write a referral letter for another physician explaining the condition of this patient? And it will work.
Now, so the document is generated on either the web app if you're on a computer or on your iPhone. Now, if you have a compatible EMR, is that automatically going to get populated into that day's encounter? Or am I going to be at the end of the day, when I'm exhausted, copying and pasting Word documents or, some type of Apple text into the electronic health record?
No, it's automatically connected to your EMR. So when you're done with the interaction, the only thing, and I tell that to everyone, the only thing is you have to review the note. Because as good as the AI is, it's not 100%. The same way a human scribe is not 100%. So you always have to review the notes. Then you just review it, press a button, and send automatically into your EMR. And what I tell people is really interesting to me, because I can tell you, because I've been giving so many demos and now we have like thousands of physicians using the platform. I call that the Wi-Fi on airplane symptom, where, when you started to use Wi-Fi on airplane, you were like, this is amazing. Like, I can't believe that I have Wi-Fi on an airplane. And then after like 2 months, people were already thinking, oh, I can't believe it's not working. So I feel like with like AI, we are a bit at that point where it works 99.9% of the time, but people get frustrated when it doesn't work. So I tell people, hey, AI is not perfect. AI can hallucinate, it can make up things. It can also hear things wrong, like especially if you're saying the word of a medication or a word that's like not very common, or if you have a patient that doesn't speak English very well and has like an accent. So yeah, never 100%, but you review the note, press a button, it sends to your EMR.
Now, I would say that I am on the somewhat neurotic end of the spectrum, and like every imaging lab test is going to have a date associated with it. So, I'm an oncologist. I see a lot of patients with cancer, and I'm trying to imagine how this interaction would go. Elie, nice to meet you. I understand that you had a ultrasound on May 7th, 2024, which showed a 4.4 centimeter real mass, and this was further characterized with a CT scan on May 19th, which shows an enhancing mass. Is that kind of how this would be expected to go if you want to have that level of details? And there's a follow-up question coming.
Well, I mean, the AI will have as many details as you give to it. And actually, it's a really good point, because people think of summarization as something fairly stupid. There's a reason why AI medical notes are only coming up now, because of the advance of like ChatGPT and OpenAI. So because if you really think about it, summarization takes a lot of intelligence. Like, for instance, if a patient comes to you and he's like, hey, I just came back from a trip to Hawaii. And also they talk about the fact that they're really struggling to pee and maybe they have a mass and whatever. Is that trip to Hawaii relevant in the medical notes? It's a really hard question. And the AI is going to make a guess, and usually will get it right. But sometimes you're going to be like, hey, AI, you forgot the trip to Hawaii. And actually it was really relevant because maybe they got on an airplane and this is what happened on an airplane, whatever it is, right? All that to say, as much detail, but it's going to omit things on purpose because you don't want to have everything. You don't want to have the chit chat probably in your notes most of the time, but sometimes it will get it wrong.
Yeah. And I guess where I'm going with this, at least when I think about how I do things, there's a lot of prep work in terms of the documenting required. So let's say it's a new patient, right, that was seen at another hospital for an elevated PSA. That's a blood test that can be a trigger to start an evaluation for prostate cancer. And then they got an MRI, then got a biopsy, and now they're here to see me. So if we think about, let's say a standard American visit is 20 minutes. Now, if I spend the first 20 minutes of that at my desk reviewing all the records, now I'm down to 15 minutes. And now I've got 15 minutes to tell a man that he has got prostate cancer. So what about that prep work? Is there any way to kind of use AI, or does ScribeMD AI, for instance, have a way to say this intelligent summary is Joe Schmo, 67 years old, PSA on January 4th, MRI on January 9th, biopsy on January 26th that shows Gleason score XYZ prostate cancer, is here to see you. Where now I'm cooking with gas, where I can look at one thing, spend a minute on it, and let's go.
Yes, there's a way to do it. And I guess there are multiple ways to do it. But with ScribeMD, I usually tell people we're like an AI, we're not only an AI scribe, we're really trying to be an AI medical assistant. And one of the tools that we launched, we have a handful of tools that could answer what you're trying to do. But one that's really relevant is we have something called Lab Analyzer, and it analyzes labs. So you can upload the lab, or you can upload a series of labs and use like a chat GPT type user experience to just say, hey, can you summarize those? Hey, is there anything, like, can you just tell me like the highlight of, or can you give me like a trend line of how this value is over time? Here are 5 files. And by the way, all these things, I would tell people outside of the medical industry, just use ChatGPT, because ChatGPT can do a really good job. As a matter of fact, if you try today, actually don't do it. If you were to try today, to take a bunch of patient labs, upload it into the latest ChatGPT, and ask stuff like, can I get a trend line on this value? Or can I get, like, can you give me like a patient summary for this lab? It will do a really good job, but it's a really big but. ChatGPT is not HIPAA compliant, and ChatGPT, and they're very open about it, they use your data for training. So you obviously don't want to put HPI into ChatGPT. And so that's why internally we built like a fully HIPAA compliant ChatGPT where you can upload documents and analyze them. And all the data that you put is in a HIPAA compliant environment. It's never shared with anyone. It's fully encrypted, and it's not used for training, and it's fully HIPAA compliant.
Yeah, that's it's like you're in my head, Elie, because in my show preparation outline notes, I have legal considerations as coming up next. So I appreciate you sharing that. And, maybe just some terminology here. I think we're talking a little bit about natural language processing. I think we're talking a little bit about generative AI. Can you, for the lay person, i.e. end user MD in this, just talk a little bit about the kind of elements as they exist today, and maybe just a little walk through memory lane of what did ScribeMD AI 1.0 look like, and what does it look like today?
So just super quick, high level. That's a question I get all the time around, like, what's the difference between ML, NLP, AI? And people are complaining of the alphabet soup. So first, let me tell you, any physician who complains to me about the alphabet soup, and I don't get that, because you guys are like, every time I go to a medical conference, I'm like, MD, NP, FACOG, whatever. I'm like physicians are professional alphabet soup people. So that's but I agree.
Fair.
Like, the terms can be confusing. So super high level, machine learning and AI are essentially the same thing, and NLP is a subset of machine learning. Machine learning is just a way, obviously, to like teach a computer something that's not necessarily deterministic, but can be stochastic. And what I mean by that is, if you look at the grand scheme of the history of computers, it used to be that computers were really good at like deterministic things. So you could say 2 + 2 = 4. But then what if you say, hey, what's a really good song? Like an AI, it's not deterministic, right? There are many answers. Like, what style of song do you like? And so that's like a big part of intelligence. It's not purely deterministic. It's also stochastic. So we had essentially really good calculators, but we didn't really have really good thought machines. And so machine learning and AI started to create thought machine. And generative AI is where you can create something from it, because machine learning, it's a really wide field. One of the things that every physician has been hearing for decades now is using pattern recognition for machine learning. Like, that's a very classic like machine learning usage. So you look at like billions of X-rays, and then or you look at billions of picture of like skin rashes, and you can tell whether or not a tag is cancerous or not, right? So that classification is a really good example. So anyway, so that's machine learning, and AI and generative AI is like, I feel like it's a new way to talk about generative machine learning. It's just like the new term that's and actually, as a matter of fact, I graduated college in 2010. And in 2010, like no one would talk about machine learning, but essentially when I was doing computer science, we're doing AI.
Okay. So, thus far, it sounds rosy. The HIPAA compliance kind of takes that all out of it. I think most practices, institutions are appropriately, really geared up to make sure there's not data hacks. So without getting too far into it, it sounds like that is a very solvable problem, just to make sure the correct encryption and data security. So that's all there. Now, can you compare and contrast a little bit to an in-person scribe? So somebody who sits there in clinic with you and helps out, let's just say.
Yeah. So the experience is pretty similar. If you think of what an ambient scribe does, and I feel like a lot of physicians actually never get to interact with human scribes. And as we were launching ScribeMD, we actually talked and sat down next to a bunch of scribes to understand how they worked and how they took notes. But it's a very similar user experience. As a matter of fact, there were a lot of companies that were doing remote scribe too. So I would say from a physician's perspective, we tell people, consider the ScribeMD application like a scribe. Like, you can talk to it. Because one of the things that people really don't realize is the good thing when you have a scribe is you verbalize it. Like, I don't know, you touch a patient and you're like, oh, when I'm touching the right knee, I can see pain. What type of pain is it, sir? Is it like a stabbing pain? Okay, stabbing pain. So they say it out loud. If there's no scribe, maybe they won't say it out loud. So we tell people overall, by and large, it's a very similar, what we call user experience or physician experience from having an AI scribe to a physical scribe, to a human scribe. The two main differences is the AI scribe is actually much better at remembering things, right? Like, I mean, obviously, like, humans are humans, and surprisingly, like, they tend to forget things, they tend to miss context, they tend to mishear things. In general, there's actually a pretty big study that came out from the New England Journal of Medicine about AI scribe. AI scribe tend to perform in many ways better than human scribes. And also in our case, and I think we're the only one doing that, we're scribing in over 50 languages. So obviously we're based in California. We do a lot of visits in Spanish. Like, if your scribe speaks only English and then you have a patient that speaks Spanish, like, what do you do with your scribe? Like, do you have to, like, then dictate your note to your scribe? Essentially, then you're back to square one. You're just dictating a note, right? But in general, I would say it's a pretty similar experience than having an AI scribe. And obviously, I mean, having an AI scribe is really hard to scale, because if a large hospital institution were to hire one AI scribe per physician, which, by the way, I think would be a totally reasonable thing to do based on the savings they would get from getting more scribes and getting physician more time back. But it's like, it would cost the hospital millions of dollars a year, if not more. Whereas an AI scribe, just to give you a sense, so that's the question you didn't ask me. Like, our solution is only $99 a month, which is probably what you would pay a human scribe for a couple of hours of work.
Yeah, I mean, I think the cost implications are absolutely very real. You know, we have a model where you can basically pay for a scribe out of your own pocket. And that's not a driver for me. It's probably more my neuroses, but that just hasn't made sense. And some people do and some people don't. But it's not cheap. You know, it's we're in California. Appropriately, there's a good living wage. And, you know, you run the numbers, it adds up quickly. Do you have some statistics on uptake? Like, I'm in California. You're in California. Every other car is a Tesla. I was recently back in Texas, and, you know, once in a blue moon, you'd see an electric car. There's got to be early adopters and late adopters, but percentage of physicians, percentage of practices, certain subspecialties or generalists that are using Scribe AI technologies?
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to tell, because obviously a lot of this data is not public. I can tell you from my personal experience with ScribeMD, we really see kind of like two groups that are moving at two drastically different paces. So you have independent clinics, and those are like, whatever, it's like $99 a month. I'll give it a shot. And usually they love it and they keep using it, and they refer us to a bunch of their friends. And honestly, that's a lot of our growth. It's just kind of word of mouth, and people feel like they're getting a steal of value to only pay $99 a month and save like an hour and a half every day. So that's one part. And then you have the other side of the equation, which is large hospitals. And these days, like, a lot of physicians are working for large institutions. And in that case, usually the decision on what AI scribe technology you want to use is very top down. Like, they're waiting for which one is approved. So for us, like, we're talking to we're working with Mayo Clinic, and we're working with large institutions to help us get our product out there in larger institution. But just the process is much slower. But what's interesting too is a lot of physicians that are working in large hospital, and maybe I shouldn't say that in a public forum, but whatever, we'll keep it. They say, screw it. I'm wasting my time writing notes. I want to use an AI scribe. I'll pay for it out of pocket. And I'm just not going to ask anyone's opinion whether or not I should use that. And we see actually quite a bit of that. And actually a lot of the large hospitals that we're working with, they have their physician being like, hey, we are already using that solution. We want you to we want the hospital to be cool with it, because that's what we're doing.
Yeah, I mean, that resonates in a big way. We talked about burnout. Autonomy is a big part of it. And if it's like, here's this tool that can improve your quality of life and the patient's experience, which I think are front and center for many of us, and you don't have access, that's off-putting. And I'll share an example. one of my good friends who I've gotten to know through this whole process, who's a forward-thinking, I would say, excellent clinician and entrepreneur, is David Keynes, and he's developed an app called Well Prepped, with the idea being that if you can pre-educate patients, that visit can be a little bit higher yield, not running through a lot of the spiel, if you will. And when he first showed me the app, it was like my jaw dropped. I was like, it's so obvious. It makes so much sense. And I got all excited. I created some videos and I put some BackTable episodes on there that I thought patients may benefit from. And it was amazing. And I just did it. And I paid out of pocket. I was like, it's worth it to me because the patients do better and I can have a higher yield visit. And I will say I'm very pleasantly happy to report that our UCSD urology department is this close from having an institutional agreement. But it didn't happen overnight, I can assure you. And I can't wait to submit all those receipts for reimbursement when it becomes official. But yeah, I can see that. I mean, large systems, and it's complicated, right? I mean, the data security, the conflicts of interest, clearly there's competitors out there, and how do you pick the best? And, at some level, maybe this is a case where perfect becomes the enemy of the good, and you stall and stall and stall just because it's foreign. So you have the independent practices that are a little bit more nimble, and then you have the large institutions. Then I have to imagine there's going to be some familiarity with technology, openness to trying something a little bit different. Does that seem to play out in the demographic? I mean, is it generally docs under the age of X, or is it actually full spectrum?
You know what? Actually, we've had, I would say it's pretty full spectrum. Especially if you think of older doctors, they've had to adopt EMR anyways. So they're they know that, they're pretty ready to adopt new technologies. But on what you mentioned, something really interesting that happened to us is we had a lot of very, very young users, because one of the big things that we're doing is we're giving the app 100% for free to every resident. And I can't tell you how many times I had the conversation with a residency program manager who is like, please, can you jump on a call with my CIO? Or can you please jump on a call with some IT person? And I'm like, I usually do it, but I feel like it's so terrible for me, because I'm giving you a product for free, because it's 100% free for resident. So I give it for free, plus I have to work extra time to jump on calls and to do all this extra work to convince CIOs and to convince execs. And I'm like, there's no ROI. It's like a free thing. So it's a bit tough.
Yeah, but getting at the ground floor.
Yeah, but you'd be surprised. A lot of older physicians are definitely using us and they love it.
Very cool. Very cool. Are there, outside of legal regulations, compliance, privacy concerns, data security, are there any other ethical issues that you see arising or that have arisen?
There's a bunch. There's obviously the equity part of things, how well are we capturing patient with an accent? How well are we capturing the voice of a patient who speaks a different language? So that's something we're working on. But I would say the big elephant in the room when we talk about AI, medical AI, is when will AI do diagnosis? And the big thing that we tell people all the time is obviously summarization is not diagnosis. We just take your conversation and we just summarize it. But as I told you earlier, there's still a little bit of decision making that you have to make when you're summarizing a conversation. So that's a big ethic. So I gave you the example of you go on a trip to Hawaii and then you go to your physician and you talk about your trip to Hawaii. Do you mention it in the notes? And mentioning it or not mentioning it, that's going to play in the note itself, and the note can play into the diagnosis. It's not I can tell you because I had this conversation with the president of the AMA, and the big thing he said is not over my dead body would an AI ever make a diagnosis. That physicians make diagnosis, AI can assist with diagnosis, they don't make diagnosis. And I totally get it. But also, it's not black and white. It's not AI is making decisions or AI is not making decisions. The thing with AI, it's kind of in the middle. When you write a note for a physician, you're obviously not a physician. A scribe doesn't have to be a physician. But if you ever take a scribe, you can try that. You can get your kid to try to scribe for you. Most likely, the note is going to be entirely wrong, because you have to understand the context. You have to capture maybe the patient is going to describe a pain that's not like a clear way to write, to say it medically. So like that takes some understanding and reasoning there. So that's like a huge like ethical concern. And even for us, like we're launching like an AI chat GPT, like a chat GPT that's HIPAA compliant. Obviously, like we tell physicians, be very careful. Like that's not like trust it with a grain of salt. Make sure that you review what it's saying. Another tool that we have that we didn't talk about is we have an AI medical research tool where you can ask a question and we essentially parsed all PubMed articles and it will give you an answer. Plus it will give you the relevant PubMed articles to back up that answer. So we tell people, look, these PubMed articles are real. You can click on them, but be very careful with the answer that it gives you because the answer is AI generated. It's not a peer-reviewed response. And I think, to be honest, I think we're going to get to a point, huge ethical issue again, but we're going to get to a point where the AI is going to become so good that not using AI for diagnosis is going to sound kind of crazy. The way I describe it is like a little bit like self-driving. I mean, I'm in LA. I don't know if you have them in San Diego, but now we're starting to see the Waymo all around town and they're driving without pilot, right? What happens when, and we're probably already there, when self-driving cars become safer than regular cars? Like the ethical implication to let humans drive the car. So obviously humans are still going to be making diagnoses. They're still going to be interacting with patients. But what is the interaction of not using like AI to help you with diagnosis? Like that's a pretty big ethical concern. As a matter of fact, I saw like a few months that was in Canada. You had a patient who sued our doctor because the doctor had an AI recommendation for a diagnosis and the physician didn't follow the recommendation and the physician was wrong and the patient sued the physician. So I can tell you in terms of like medical AI and even beyond medical, but only in the medical field, there's going to be a ton of ethical concern. There's going to be a ton of legislation that's going to come down. The AMA, I know, is already working really hard to like put all that framework in place to figure out what can AI do and what can AI not do. But
no, I appreciate that. And I've had some pretty amazing conversation with some people substantially brighter than myself, Gio Cacciamani, Ruchika Talwar, CJ Stimson. And, you know, you said that the president of the AMA said over my dead body, and maybe I'm a bit biased being at a tertiary coronary hospital where if there's a referral to me and the proper notes, proper records come through, where that could all be scanned into a GPT and using maybe just a chief complaint prompt or a diagnosis, you get a differential and next steps. And let's just say maybe it's a CMS compliant level 5 new visit. And then I go in, I say, okay, Elie, looks like you're 67, you first peed blood on this date, then you had a CT scan on this date, after you went to the ER, and they did this, that, and the other tests, and you do indeed have an 8-centimeter renal mass, and we have to, complete your staging with a chest CT and then take it out. And that interaction could be, okay, maybe there's a couple of more critical elements in there, but not too many more that are essential from a medical perspective. The interaction and the relationship, we'll call that separate. And then the SOAP verifies all that, the Scribe AI, which is all part of the whole thing. And, now I'm off to enjoying San Diego in June way earlier. I mean, is that okay? Is that not okay? Is that value added? We look at the pathology and the radiology where you look at a gazillion mammograms or CT scans or solitary pulmonary nodules or the rashes you talked about. Is this good? Is this bad? Maybe I'll pose it to you, then I'll offer my 2 cents.
Well, I can tell you, my vision of the future is pretty clear. I think what's going to happen is the AI is really good at things. Physicians are going to be really good at things that are going to be irreplaceable for the long term. And I think what's going to happen is, there's this famous quote, is human with AI are going to replace humans without AI. And I think what's going to happen is for physicians, they're going to be talking to the patient. They're going to be doing a lot of the interaction. They're going to be navigating like the complex diagnosis, but they're going to be totally backed up by AI, where it's like, hey, can you remind me? I talked to John Doe earlier today. Can you remind me his diagnosis? Oh, did he have diabetes? Did he mention anything about like family history of prostate cancer? Like all these things, you're going to be able to ask an AI and the AI will give you the answer right away. So you're going to have something that takes like maybe a group of like one physician or two physicians and a nurse and a scribe and a physical assistant, all that is going to be replaced by one person. So the physician is going to be able to do way more with less. That's how I see the future. And to be clear, I mean, the current status quo for physicians is just not possible. Like the fact that physicians are so overworked, a lot of physicians put 60, 70, 80 hours a week. Like it's not scalable. And we're not training enough physicians. Population is getting sicker and sicker. Like I see my first clients are in Canada. Like nowadays, Canada wait time is insane. Like if you want to talk to an ENT or if you want to talk to a dermatologist, you have to wait like 3, 4, 5 months. So that's not scalable. We're going to have to do more with less. And I think AI is coming at the perfect time to do that.
Yeah, I mean, I just had this like kind of random vision of like these pods that are equidistant spaced throughout the country where you can walk in with your Apple Watch, get a full body scan, and just talk for about 10 minutes, and maybe you're limited to 10 minutes about what's going on at a population level. If you get it right 92% of the time versus that patient has zero access to any meaningful health care, is that a win? And, you know, maybe there are going to be some people that slips through the cracks. And I mean, I think, you know, to your first point, there's probably some like Elizabeth Kubler-Ross element to this where it's going to be denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and then acceptance. And maybe a 6 could be jubilation where you're like, oh my gosh, this is actually amazing. But I couldn't agree more. You know, I think it'll allow people to engage in more meaningful human interaction at the end of the day, not necessarily as a replacement, but that's just my sense. But if you miss the gravy train, then it could be a little bit more challenging. Well, Elie, I mean, this has been awesome. I mean, on behalf of physicians, I'd like to thank people like yourselves that are spending your time and your time on this earth trying to make a better experience for patients and for providers. So I mean that. I'm not just saying it. But, you know, you've talked a little bit about the future. Just any parting words for the listenership before we call it a day?
Yeah. ScribeMD.ai, give it a try. It's free for 10 visits a month, so you can try it for free. And if you ping me on Twitter, I'm Elie, Elie Toubiana, Toubiana. If you add me on Twitter and you send me a DM, I can probably extend your free trial if you really like it.
All right, Elie. Well, thank you so much for coming on the show. This was amazing. I really appreciate it.
All right, thank you.
Thank you so much for listening. If you haven't already, make sure to subscribe, rate the podcast 5 stars, and share with a friend. If you have any questions or comments, direct message us at _BackTable ENT on Instagram, LinkedIn, or Twitter. BackTable ENT is hosted by Gopi Shah
and Ashley Agan.
Our audio team is led by Kieran Gannon, with support from
Josh McWhirter,
Aaron Bowles, Nick Shellcross,
Josh Spencer.
Design and digital marketing led by Brian Schmitz, with support from
Taylor Spurgeon Hess.
Social media and PR by Chi Ding.
Administrative support provided by Jamila Kennebrew.
Thanks again for listening, and see you next week.